I stood there in the driveway, watching my mother step out onto the porch, suitcase in tow, a smile plastered on her face. She looked as though she were about to leave for a weekend getaway. Not for the trip I had been planning for months. A trip I had meticulously arranged, down to the last detail, to give my parents a vacation they'd never forget. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late. But somehow it felt like so much more than that. "You're late," my mom said, her voice light, almost cheerful. She didn't seem to notice the tension hanging in the air. "2 minutes late, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile, though it barely touched my lips. I wasn't about to let on how much that stung, but my stomach twisted with a mix of confusion and something darker. I stepped out of the car, ready to help with the luggage, when I saw her. My sister, Lily, emerging from the front door with her own suitcase in hand. My heart sank. I froze for a moment. My mom was supposed to go on this trip with me. We'd been planning it together for years. But instead, here was Lily, smugly walking toward the car, as if she belonged there, as if she had been part of the plan all along. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. I didn't want to show them how hurt I was, but it was impossible to ignore the shock and betrayal rising in my chest. My mom turned to me, her expression far too bright, too cheery, for the situation at hand. "Oh, sweetie," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "We decided Lily should come instead of you. She's been under so much stress lately, and she really needs this trip." I felt the air leave my lungs. Instead of me? My mind struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "Mom, I've been planning this trip for years," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Felt like the words weren't even my own. But my mother only shrugged, as if I had just pointed out something trivial, something that didn't matter. "And we're grateful for everything you've done, sweetheart," she said, her tone condescending. "But you've been working so hard lately. You can take another trip later. Lily really needs this one right now." Lily didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She just stood there, smirking, like she had won some kind of game. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at the two of them, my mind racing, my chest tight, couldn't breathe. All the planning, all the sacrifices, none of it mattered. Not when Lily needed something more. When Lily's stress took precedence over everything I'd done. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold it together. The anger bubbling up inside me was almost too much to bear. But I didn't let it spill out. Not yet. Instead, I forced a smile, tight and stiff. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice flat. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. Let them go. But I wasn't about to pretend like it didn't hurt. I opened the trunk and started unloading their bags, trying to ignore the knot that had formed in my stomach. I didn't want to cry, not now, not in front of them. So I focused on the task, pretending like it didn't matter. But everything mattered. Everything felt wrong. I drove them to the airport, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each passing mile. The silence in the car was deafening, save for Lily's incessant chatter, the kind she always did when she was excited. Oblivious to the fact that I wasn't sharing in her excitement. She babbled about the shopping in Paris, about the places she couldn't wait to visit, the Instagram photos she was planning to take. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, my knuckles white, my jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. "Do you think we'll have time for shopping?" Lily asked, her voice bright, eager. "Or will the tours take up the whole day?" My mom chuckled softly from the back seat. "Of course we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there." The "we" didn't even register. They didn't realize it, but they were no longer talking about a trip for all of us. I wasn't part of that "we" anymore. I was just the one driving them there, the one who had been excluded from the very thing I'd worked so hard to make happen. The injustice of it hit me like a wave, pulling me under with every word they spoke. It wasn't about the trip anymore. It was about how they saw me. It was about how I had been pushed aside, as though everything I'd done for them didn't matter, as though I didn't matter. "Thank you for driving us, Emily," my dad said quietly from the back seat. his voice awkward, as though he wasn't sure how to make up for the obvious tension in the car. He always had this way of speaking, like he thought words alone could fix everything. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his eyes avoiding mine. Unusual, I repeated, unable to stop myself. That's an interesting way to put it, Dad. He didn't answer. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his unease palpable. He knew, just as well as I did, that this wasn't just unusual. This was unfair. But he wouldn't say it. They never did. They never admitted the truth, not to me, not to anyone. Lily leaned forward from the back seat, her voice full of false sweetness. "You're not mad, right?" she asked, her words laced with a tone of superiority I was becoming all too familiar with. "I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go instead of you. I could never have afforded this on my own." I clenched my jaw again, my grip on the steering wheel tightening even more. Letting me go instead of you? Was that how she saw it? As though this was some kind of favor I was doing her? I had to force my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course, Lily," I said, my voice flat. "Enjoy the trip." We drove in silence after that, the kind of silence that says everything without a single word being spoken. I wasn't angry anymore. I was beyond angry. I was numb. Numb to the fact that I was being ignored, pushed aside. Numb to the realization that, no matter what I did, I would always come second in their eyes. That's how it had always been, and I had just never admitted it to myself until now. By the time we reached the airport drop-off zone, I was barely holding it together. I helped unload their luggage, my movements mechanical. My mom gave me a hug, too tight, as though it would somehow make everything okay. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with false gratitude. I nodded stiffly, the words stuck in my throat. "Sure, Mom." Lily didn't even bother to say anything more. She just flashed me a grin, all smugness and fake gratitude. "Thanks, Emily. You're the best." I stood there, watching them disappear into the terminal, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me, but I didn't know how to make it stop. The air felt heavy with all the things I wanted to say but couldn't. So I stayed silent. I sat in the car for a few minutes after they left, staring at the dashboard. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over, the words they'd said, the way they made me feel like I didn't matter, like nothing I did was enough. Before I share what happened next, the moment I finally decided to take control of my life and stop being the family's fixer, I want to take a moment to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like you were left out or taken for granted, hit that like button because this story is about to take a huge turn. I drove back home, the empty road stretching out before me, each mile taking me farther from the suffocating silence of the airport. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. What had started as excitement for the trip had turned into this ugly mess, a reminder of how little I mattered. But one thing was clear, I was done. Done being the one who cleaned up everyone's mess. Done being the afterthought. And I had no idea how it would play out, but I knew something had to change. So I did what I had to do. I walked into the house, sat down at my computer, and started canceling everything, the flights, the tours, the reservations. All of it. I was done. If they wanted to take Lily instead of me, fine. But they wouldn't be staying in 5-star hotels or enjoying the trip I had meticulously planned. Not on my dime. Not anymore. The drive back from the airport felt endless. I could feel the tension in the car as if the walls were closing in on me with every mile. It wasn't just the absence of my family. It wasn't just the suffocating silence of the empty passenger seat next to me. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being irrelevant in my own family's eyes. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached, but it wasn't enough to release the pressure that was building in my chest. The longer I drove, the angrier I became, not just at my family, but at myself. Why had I let it go on this long? Why had I let them treat me like this? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I could barely see through the blur of tears that threatened to fall. I didn't know if I was angry, sad, or just exhausted from being in this toxic cycle for so long. The past 2 years had been a blur of overtime, long shifts, and missed moments, all in an effort to make my family happy. I had been saving every penny, sacrificing everything, to give them a vacation they would remember forever. And how did they repay me? By replacing me with Lily. My heart tightened as I thought about how little they seemed to care about everything I had done. The effort, the time, the planning, it all felt worthless now. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door of the house. I wasn't ready to go inside. Not yet. I needed a moment to process, to breathe, to decide what came next. My phone buzzed with a new message from my mom. I opened it, reading the words with a sick feeling in my stomach. "Thanks again for driving us, sweetheart. We'll call you when we get there. Love you. Love you." The words felt hollow, like they were just thrown in there to smooth over the cracks they'd already created. They didn't love me. Not the way they loved Lily, anyway. They didn't love me enough to care about how I felt, to see how much this hurt. The thought of replying made my stomach churn. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to hear their excuses or their fake apologies. I didn't want to be the one who always had to fix things, to make them feel better after they'd hurt me. I wasn't their doormat anymore. My mind raced. I couldn't just sit here and let this go. I had to do something. But what? What could I do to make them understand how much they had taken me for granted? How could I make them see that I was done with being the second choice, the one who was always pushed aside? I thought about the trip, the one I had planned down to the smallest detail. The flights, the luxury hotels, the guided tours. Everything was in place. And now it was all for nothing. I stared at the phone screen again, my thumb hovering over the screen as I debated whether to send a message or not. I didn't know what I expected to get out of it. Apologies? A change of heart? Maybe. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't get either of those things. Not unless I made them see me. Really see me. So I did it. I started canceling everything. I opened up the flight booking app first. With a few taps, I canceled their tickets, the ones that had cost me so much to secure. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I clicked the confirmation button. The hotels followed next. The luxurious, 5-star accommodations I had meticulously picked out, the ones I had dreamed of staying in with my family, were now gone. Canceled. Then the tours, the guided tours I had carefully researched, the ones that were supposed to take us to all the best spots, the hidden gems of the city. Gone too. Felt freeing, but it also felt like a knife in my chest. I had worked so hard for this. I had put everything into it. And now I was taking it all away. But I didn't care. Couldn't care. They had chosen Lily over me. They had made their decision, and now they would have to face the consequences of that choice. I wasn't going to be the one to bail them out anymore. Not this time. The more I canceled, the more a strange sense of satisfaction began to settle over me. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel bad. I felt powerful. For once, I was in control. I wasn't just following along, doing whatever they asked, fixing their messes. I was making my own decisions for once, and it felt good. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was done. There was no going back now. I knew they would be angry. They would blame me, but I didn't care. I couldn't keep living my life to please them, to make them happy while I was constantly left in the shadows. For once, I was putting myself first. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from my mom. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear their voices, to listen to their excuses. I knew what they would say, how it was all so unfair, how I was overreacting, how they never meant to hurt me. But that wasn't good enough anymore. I needed them to understand that their actions had consequences. They needed to know what it felt like to be left out, to be ignored, to be treated as less than. I threw my phone onto the couch and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were spinning, but there was a part of me that was calm. This was the start of something new, the start of me reclaiming my life. I wasn't going to keep letting them dictate how I lived, how I felt, what I did. I was done being the fixer, the one who always made things right. I had spent too many years sacrificing myself for their happiness, for their comfort, and it had never been enough. It was time for me to take control, to live for me. The phone buzzed again. It was my dad this time. I looked at the screen for a moment before pressing the button to reject the call. I didn't want to talk to him either. Not now. I wasn't ready to explain myself, to justify my actions. They would have to figure it out on their own. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But it didn't matter. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I picked up my laptop and opened the browser. I started looking up places I could go. Places that had been on my list for years, but I had never gotten around to. Solo trips. Trips where I could explore, where I could finally live without worrying about anyone else's needs or expectations. It felt like a weight had been lifted off me, the freedom to choose whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. By the time the sun was setting, I had made my decision. I was booking my own trip, a trip that was mine. I didn't need anyone else to validate it, to approve of it. It wasn't about proving a point to my family. It was about proving to myself that I was worthy of living the life I wanted on my own terms. I wasn't going to wait around for them to change, for them to understand. I wasn't going to wait for them to see how much I had done for them, how much I had sacrificed. I had to start living for me, and that's exactly what I was going to do. I hit the book now button with a sense of finality. The reservation was confirmed. The trip was mine. And as I sat there, the weight in my chest finally began to ease. I was free. I was free from the expectations, the guilt, the constant need to prove myself to my family. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. And this time it was for me. The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions. Part of me felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of the expectations that had been placed on me for so long. But another part of me, the part that still cared, still hoped, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things would never be the same between me and my family. I knew I had made the right decision, but that didn't make the pain any less real. By the third day, the silence had grown unbearable. I had made my choice, but my family hadn't yet accepted it. The phone rang early that morning, a familiar number flashing on the screen. My mom. I didn't answer. Not then. The silence persisted, with every ring of my phone reminding me that they hadn't stopped trying to reach me. A part of me felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly reminded myself that I wasn't the one who had messed everything up. They were, and I couldn't keep fixing things for them. They needed to learn to deal with the consequences of their actions. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from my dad. "Emily, please, call us back. We need to talk. This isn't like you." The words sent a sharp pain through my chest. My dad had always been the quiet one, the one who preferred to avoid confrontation. But now it was clear that even he had been affected by my decision. I wasn't sure what bothered me more, the fact that they were all so desperate or the fact that they thought I would just fold like I always did. But this time I wasn't going to. I read the message over and over again, the guilt gnawing at me. Was I really being unfair? Was I being too harsh? Maybe I should have let them enjoy the trip, even if it meant swallowing my pride. But then I remembered the years of feeling overlooked, the times I had been ignored, the moments when my sacrifices had gone unnoticed. And I knew that I couldn't go back to that. Not now. Not ever again. I glanced at the phone again. It buzzed once more. Another text. This time from my mom. "We're stuck here. The hotel won't let us check in. What did you do? Call me now." Her words were frantic, a mixture of panic and confusion. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. They had no idea what it was like to be in my shoes, to feel completely disregarded, as though I didn't matter. Now they were feeling it. Now they were getting a taste of their own medicine. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment they would finally understand what it felt like to be me. They couldn't just take me for granted anymore. They couldn't expect me to clean up their mess every time they screwed up. The phone rang again. This time it was my mom. I let it ring out, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was tight with emotion, shaky. "Emily, this isn't funny. We're stranded. The reservation is gone. Why would you do this?" Her tone was a mix of disbelief and frustration. She sounded as though she couldn't understand why I would hurt them like this, as though she couldn't comprehend the depth of my feelings. For years, I had been the one to fix everything, to make sure they were happy, to make sure they were comfortable. And every time I did, it was like my efforts didn't even register. I had done everything for them, and in return, I had been discarded. And now, I was the one who was hurting them. It was almost laughable. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. It wasn't worth my time. They had their own mess to figure out now. Let them. The calls continued, each one more desperate than the last. My phone screen was filled with notifications, each one a reminder that I had finally stopped playing the role they had assigned me. And while part of me wanted to give in, to call them back and make things right, a bigger part of me knew I couldn't. Not this time. I had to stand firm. I had to show them that I wasn't going to let them treat me like this anymore. The next day, my mom tried again. The text message came through early in the morning. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. The tours are gone too. You've ruined everything. We're really disappointed in you. I stared at the message for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Disappointed in me? They were the ones who had thrown me aside, the ones who had replaced me with Lily. And now they were disappointed in me? I thought about all the times I had put them first, all the sacrifices I had made, and how little it had ever meant to them. And yet, here they were, acting like I was the one who had done something wrong. They didn't deserve my time, my energy, or my care. They had taken so much from me, and I had given it all willingly, hoping that one day they would see me. But they hadn't. They never had. And now it was my turn to be seen. I took a deep breath and put my phone down, leaving their messages unread for the time being. There was nothing left to say. They could stew in their own frustration. Maybe they would learn something from this, maybe they wouldn't. But I wasn't going to be the one to fix it anymore. The phone rang again later that evening. This time it was my dad. I almost didn't answer. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear him try to guilt me into backing down. But then I remembered the countless times he had asked me to fix things, to clean up messes that weren't mine to begin with. So I picked up. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. Your mom's upset. Lily's crying. This isn't like you." I could feel the frustration in his voice, but there was something else there too. Something that almost sounded like desperation. As if he was hoping I would return to the role I had always played, the one where I just made everything better, no questions asked. But I wasn't that person anymore. Couldn't be. Too far. I repeated, my voice calm, but firm. "You think this has gone too far? What about all the years I've spent fixing your mistakes? What about all the times I've sacrificed my time, my energy, my life for you all? Was that fair? Was that okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him sigh, probably trying to figure out what to say next. "You've always been the reasonable one," he said quietly. "The one who keeps things together." "Not anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to keep cleaning up your messes. I'm done with that. You've made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences." "But this isn't about just one trip, Emily," my dad said, his voice rising. "This is about family. We can't just leave things like this." "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You think this is about family? You're right, this isn't just about one trip. It's about years of being overlooked, years of putting Lily first, years of me sacrificing everything, and still being treated like I didn't matter. You want me to fix everything? Well, I'm not going to. Not anymore." The line went quiet. I knew he didn't know what to say. Neither did I, really. But I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "I'm done, Dad," I said quietly, my voice firm. "I'm done being the one who always fixes things. I'm done being the afterthought. You all can figure it out on your own." I hung up the phone and sat back, feeling the weight of the words sink in. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the constant pressure to please everyone. Free from the guilt. Free from the family dynamics that had held me hostage for so long. And even though I knew this was just the beginning, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. They would learn. They had to. But it wasn't going to be because I made things right for them. It would be because they finally realized that I was worth more than being their fixer. The days that followed were strangely calm, but there was an undercurrent of unease. I didn't know exactly what I was feeling, but there was a sense of something new beginning. The phone had stopped ringing, the texts had slowed down, and the constant pressure of maintaining family harmony had finally, mercifully, stopped. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was being enough. Instead, I woke up each day with a quiet sense of freedom. The freedom to just be. No expectations, no guilt, no endless to-do lists that only mattered to everyone else. There was a strange peace in knowing I was no longer obligated to carry the weight of everyone else's problems on my shoulders. For so long, I had played the role of the fixer, the one who made everything right, who was always there, always available, always willing to sacrifice herself for the sake of others. But now that I wasn't doing that anymore, I felt a shift that was so subtle but so profound. It was as if I was seeing the world through new eyes. I found myself waking up early in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. I had forgotten what it was like to take time for myself, to actually listen to my own needs instead of everyone else's. I started going for long walks in the park near my apartment, just to clear my head. There was something so simple yet so freeing about it. Just being outside, feeling the fresh air on my skin, listening to the sounds of the world around me. For once, I wasn't rushing to do something for someone else. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes, wondering if someone needed me. I was just present, just being. One day, as I was walking through the park, I came across a little cafe I had never noticed before. The kind of place that seemed tucked away from the world, like it had its own quiet corner of the universe. I was curious, so I decided to stop in. It was the kind of cafe where time seemed to slow down, the kind of place where you could just sit and lose yourself in a book or the quiet hum of conversations. I ordered a coffee, took a seat by the window, and let myself enjoy the moment. It had been so long since I had allowed myself something like this, something purely for me with no obligation to anyone else. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I realized something that made my heart swell with unexpected emotion. I had forgotten how to enjoy life. For so long, I had been so consumed with trying to please everyone else, with trying to live up to their expectations, that I had stopped living for myself. But now I was beginning to remember. I was beginning to remember that I could have my own life. I could take care of myself. I could do things that made me happy without feeling guilty about it. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter for me. I had spent years living my life for others, doing things to gain their approval, making sacrifices to earn their love and acceptance. But now I was choosing to live for myself, and it felt liberating. I spent the next few days rediscovering little pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. I had always dreamed of taking up photography, but I had never found the time for it. Now, with a free schedule and no one to answer to, I bought myself a camera and started taking pictures of the things that caught my eye. Nature, people, moments. Every click of the camera felt like a small reclaiming of my own life, a way of expressing myself in a way that felt real and true to who I was. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was doing something for me. Not because someone else expected it, but because I wanted to. As the weeks passed, I began to feel more confident in my decisions. I wasn't second-guessing myself anymore. I wasn't constantly looking for validation or approval from my family. I realized that I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their love and respect, when in reality, the only person whose approval I needed was my own. One evening, as I sat on my couch scrolling through social media, I saw an ad for a solo travel experience. Something I had always wanted to do but had never had the courage to try. I had always dreamed of seeing the world on my own terms, free from the constraints of planning everything for others, free from the need to please anyone else. I had always told myself that someday, maybe, but now, with the weight of my family's expectations no longer hanging over me, I felt a surge of excitement. Why not now? I signed up for the trip to Italy without hesitation. It was a spontaneous decision, something I had never allowed myself to do before. And when I hit the book now button, a rush of excitement and nervousness flooded me. I was doing something for myself. I was choosing my own adventure, and that felt like the start of something huge. In the weeks leading up to my trip, I spent hours researching the places I wanted to visit in Italy, making a list of sights to see, restaurants to try, and experiences to have. But unlike all the trips I had planned before, this one wasn't for anyone else. This was for me. I wasn't worried about anyone else's needs or preferences. I wasn't catering to someone else's whims. I was just focused on what I wanted to experience. It was liberating, like I had finally found the freedom to live my life on my own terms. The day of the trip finally arrived. I boarded the plane with a mixture of excitement and nerves, but more than anything, I felt a sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. I wasn't worried about anyone else's happiness. I was doing something for myself, and that felt like the most important thing in the world. As I wandered the streets of Rome, I marveled at the beauty of the city, the ancient ruins, the vibrant life that seemed to pulse through every corner. I took pictures, tried new foods, and simply enjoyed being there. I had no schedule, no agenda, just me, the city, and the endless possibilities. It was everything I had imagined and more. I spent my days exploring, getting lost in the narrow streets, stumbling upon charming cafes, and chatting with locals. I found a quiet spot by the Spanish Steps one afternoon, where I sat with a gelato and watched the world go by. It was in that moment that I realized something profound. I wasn't just traveling. I was finally living. I wasn't hiding behind anyone else's expectations. I wasn't waiting for permission to be happy. I was fully present in my own life, in my own experience, and it felt amazing. In the evenings, I would return to my small hotel room, exhausted but content. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel fulfilled. I didn't need validation from my family, from anyone. I was discovering a new version of myself, a version that wasn't defined by the roles I had been given, by the expectations placed on me. This was my journey, and it was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. By the time I left Italy and returned home, I felt like a completely different person. The Emily who had been consumed by the need to please others, to fix everything for everyone else, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her worth, who knew what it meant to live for herself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and I wasn't going to let anything, especially not the expectations of my family, take that away from me. When I returned home, there were calls waiting for me from my family. I didn't rush to return them. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to let them pull me back into the same old dynamic. I had learned to set boundaries. I had learned to prioritize my own happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that I was enough just as I was. I had discovered my own path, and it was a path that was completely mine. A path that didn't require anyone else's approval. And that was more than I had ever asked for. It was everything I needed. When I returned home from my trip to Italy, there was a strange, unsettling silence in the air. The freedom I had felt in those few weeks was still lingering inside me, but something was different. The house felt quieter, almost suffocating. My family hadn't called me in a while, and I knew it was because they were still angry, still trying to process what had happened. I didn't feel the need to rush back into the chaos. For once, I was at peace with myself, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into the mess I had just left behind. But as the days passed, I began to feel the weight of their absence. Not the absence of their voices, but the absence of the relationship I had longed for, the one where I wasn't invisible, where I wasn't the one who had to make things right. The silence was a constant reminder of the fracture between us. I had chosen to walk away, to break free, but I couldn't help but wonder if they would ever understand why. If they would ever see how much I had given up just to keep the peace, to make them happy, only to be left in the dust. It wasn't long before the calls started again. The first was from my dad. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. His voice was softer than usual, almost tentative. "Emily," he began, his tone strained. "I think it's time we talk." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make him understand just how hurt I was, just how much I had sacrificed. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm listening. I know things have been difficult," he continued, "and I don't understand everything that happened, but we need to find a way to fix this. Your mom and Lily are, well, they're upset. They don't know where things went wrong, and I don't either. But we can't just leave it like this. I was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. I knew what he was asking. He wanted me to come back, to step back into the role I had always played, the fixer, the peacemaker. But I wasn't that person anymore. Couldn't be. Dad, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. This isn't about fixing things. This isn't about making it right. It's about understanding why it went wrong in the first place. I've spent years sacrificing myself for all of you, trying to make everything work, trying to make you all happy. And what do I get in return? I get pushed aside. I get replaced. I'm not just going to let that slide anymore. He was silent on the other end of the line, as if processing my words, letting them sink in. I never meant to hurt you, he said after a long pause, his voice tinged with regret. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I thought you'd always be there, that you'd always just take care of things. But I see now that I was wrong. There it was, the apology I had been waiting for, but it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. Felt too little, too late. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for everything he had taken for granted. But instead, I just felt tired. I can't keep doing this, Dad, I said softly. I can't keep being the one who fixes everything. I can't keep putting myself last just to make everyone else feel okay. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to anyone. There was another long pause before he spoke again. I understand, Emily. I really do. And I'm sorry. I've been blind to everything you've done, to everything you've given up. I don't want to lose you over this. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, my voice quieter now. But I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not going to keep sacrificing myself just to make you happy. I have to put myself first for once. And that means things are going to be different from now on. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. I get it. I really do. I'll talk to your mom and Lily. We'll figure this out. Before I could respond, the line went silent. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The conversation had been difficult, but it was a step in the right direction. I wasn't sure if they would truly understand, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself. I wasn't just a passive participant in my own life anymore. I was taking control. A few days later, my mom called. I had been expecting it. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. Emily, she said, her tone hesitant. We need to talk. About what? I asked, my heart racing in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another confrontation, but I knew it was inevitable. I don't know where things went wrong, she said, her voice cracking. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. I thought we were a team, but I see now that I was wrong. And I'm sorry. I didn't respond immediately. Her words sounded so genuine, but I had heard them before. I had heard the apologies and the promises of change, only for them to fall flat once the next crisis came along. But this time, something felt different. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the desperation in her tone. She wasn't just apologizing for the trip. She was apologizing for everything, for all the years she had taken me for granted. I need you to understand something, Mom, I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep putting everyone else's needs before my own. I've spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, trying to be the one who fixes everything. And I've lost myself in the process. I'm not going to keep doing that anymore. She was quiet for a long time, and for a moment, I wondered if she had heard me. But then she spoke, her voice softer now. I understand, Emily. I do. And I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on what everyone else needs that I didn't see how much you were struggling. I see now that I've been blind to it, and I'm sorry for that. I closed my eyes, feeling a weight lift off my chest. This wasn't just an apology. This was something deeper. This was a recognition of everything I had been carrying for so long, a validation of the years I had spent trying to hold everything together. And while I wasn't sure if things would ever truly change, I knew this was a start. I need space to figure things out, I said gently. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to respect that I need to put myself first now. I can't keep being the person who does everything for everyone else." She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me to come back, to fix things. Instead, she simply said, "I understand, Emily. I'm here when you're ready. I just want you to be happy." When I ended the call, I sat there for a long time, reflecting on what had just happened. I had taken the first step in truly setting boundaries, in asserting my own needs. And while it hadn't been easy, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't just trying to make everyone else happy anymore. I was finally starting to make myself happy. But the real test came when Lily called. Her voice was cold when she spoke, the familiar tone of entitlement dripping from her words. "You're really going to do this, Emily?" she said, her words sharp. "You're really going to shut us out because of one trip?" I could feel my frustration rising, but I took a deep breath before responding. "Lily, this isn't just about the trip. This is about everything that's happened before, everything I've done for you, for Mom, for all of you. I've been the one who always picks up the pieces, who always makes sure everything's okay. And I'm done. I can't keep doing it. I need to take care of myself now." She didn't respond right away, and I wondered if she even understood what I was saying. "You're being dramatic," she said finally, her voice laced with annoyance. "It was just a trip, Emily. You're acting like we betrayed you or something. It's not that big of a deal." I clenched my fists, but I didn't let her see it. "It's not just about the trip, Lily. It's about everything. And I'm not going to keep being the one to sacrifice myself for everyone else. I'm done with that." She didn't say anything else. The silence stretched between us, and when she finally hung up, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I wasn't sure if she would ever understand, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from moving forward. The conversations with my family had been difficult, but they were necessary. I had spent so many years being the fixer, the one who always made things better for everyone else. But now I was learning to put myself first. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its challenges, but I was finally starting to see that I was worth more than the role I had been assigned. And while I didn't know what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone take me for granted anymore. The weeks that followed felt like an entirely new chapter. The initial wave of relief I had experienced after returning from Italy had settled into something quieter, something deeper. It wasn't just the absence of chaos or the space I had carved out for myself. It was the confidence that came with knowing I was no longer living my life for anyone else. For so long, I had been a passenger in my own story, driven by the expectations of others, constantly putting my needs aside for the sake of family and obligation. But now I was in the driver's seat. I was navigating my own path, and the direction felt right, even if it was still uncertain. I spent my days doing things that mattered to me, things I had neglected or dismissed for years. I continued my photography, capturing everything that caught my eye, small moments, fleeting glances, the beauty of the ordinary. I wasn't just taking pictures anymore. I was capturing parts of myself, the things I had hidden away for so long. Each shot felt like a small reclaiming of my independence, a way of expressing who I was without apology, without trying to meet anyone else's expectations. But it wasn't just about the photography. It was about everything. I began to rediscover my passions, my interests, the things that made me feel alive. I joined a local book club, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I read books not because they were required for school or work, but because they sparked something inside me. I took long walks by myself, visited museums, explored new places in the city that I had always passed by but never thought to stop and see. I was finding joy in the simple things, the things I had always taken for granted. It felt like I was becoming the person I was always meant to be, the person I had buried under layers of responsibility, guilt, and sacrifice. It wasn't just about escaping from my family or proving a point anymore. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own happiness, and my own worth. But as much as I had embraced my newfound independence, there were moments when the silence between me and my family felt heavy. The calls from my mom had become fewer, the conversations more strained. I knew they were trying to figure out how to repair the damage, but I also knew they weren't quite ready to face the truth. It wasn't just about one trip. It was about years of neglecting my feelings, years of taking me for granted. And while they had apologized, I wasn't sure they truly understood the depth of what they had done. One afternoon, as I sat in the park with my journal, jotting down my thoughts, I received a message from my mom. It was a simple text: "Can we talk? We miss you." The words stung a little, but they also felt like an invitation. A way for us to bridge the gap, to finally have the conversation we had been avoiding for so long. I hadn't been sure if I was ready for this, but deep down, I knew it was time. I couldn't keep avoiding it, and neither could they. We agreed to meet at a cafe the following weekend. As the day approached, I felt a mix of emotions: nervousness, anticipation, and a sense of closure that had been building for weeks. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew that I had to be true to myself, to the person I had become. I had come so far in my journey of self-discovery, and I wasn't about to let anyone pull me back into the old patterns of pleasing others, of sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of family peace. When I walked into the cafe, I saw them sitting at a corner table, my mom and dad both looking a little uncertain, a little awkward. Lily wasn't there, which surprised me, but I knew that her absence was a sign of something. They were here to listen, to finally understand what had been weighing on me for so long. And that was enough for me for now. "Emily," my mom said softly as I sat down, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I'm sorry. I know I've let you down, and I know I haven't always been the mother you needed. I've been so caught up in what I thought was best for everyone else that I never really stopped to think about what you needed. I'm sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time I saw her as a person, not just as my mother. I saw her flaws, her mistakes, but I also saw her desire to make things right. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I could feel that she was trying, and that meant something. "I've spent so much of my life trying to please everyone," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I've always been the one who fixed things, who made sure everyone else was happy. But in doing that, I lost myself. I stopped taking care of myself. And I can't go back to that. I've had to learn how to put myself first. It's been hard, but it's been necessary. And I need you to understand that." There was a long silence between us, and for a moment, I thought they might not get it. But then my dad spoke, his voice thick with regret. "I understand, Emily. I really do. I've been blind to what you've been going through. I thought you were fine, that you were strong enough to handle everything. But I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry." My heart tightened, not out of anger, but out of something softer, something more vulnerable. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of holding on to all the hurt, tired of trying to fix everything for them. And now, here we were, trying to make it right, trying to rebuild something that had been broken for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. "I'm not asking for everything to be fixed right away," I said quietly. "I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. But I need you to understand that I'm different now. I'm not the person I was before, and I need you to respect that." My mom reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it on mine. "I respect that, Emily. I do. And I want to do better. I want to be a better mother to you, a better person. I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to try." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to fix everything. But it was enough. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their guilt, their mistakes. I was free to be myself, to be who I had become over the past few months. When the conversation ended, we didn't have all the answers. We didn't have a neat resolution, but we had a starting point, a way forward. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of losing them because I knew that I was enough with or without their approval. And that was the most freeing feeling in the world. As I walked away from the cafe, the sky stretched above me, vast and open. It felt like the world had shifted, like I was no longer bound by the old patterns, the old expectations. I was moving forward not just for them, but for me. I was embracing my own journey, my own path, and that was all that mattered. The next chapter of my life was just beginning, and for the first time I felt ready for it. I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, with confidence, with strength, with the knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was. The days after our conversation in the cafe felt like a slow unraveling, a shift in the air that was both subtle and profound. The conversations with my family were far from over, but they were different now. They were no longer about me being the one who fixed everything. They weren't about me sacrificing myself, bending over backwards to make others happy while my own happiness was pushed aside. For the first time in years, I wasn't just trying to keep the peace. I was finally standing up for myself. As the weeks passed, I began to realize something I had never truly understood before. It wasn't about fixing relationships or going back to the way things were. It was about creating a new path, one where I could live authentically, where I could honor my own needs and desires without guilt. I had spent so much of my life seeking approval, trying to meet the expectations of those around me. But now I was learning that my approval, my happiness, was enough. I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was worthy. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices. I had always been the responsible one, the one who carried the weight of everyone else's emotions, who took on the burden of family dynamics and expectations. But no longer. I wasn't responsible for fixing my family's issues. I wasn't responsible for making everyone feel better. I was responsible for my own life, for my own happiness. That realization was both empowering and terrifying. It was empowering because it meant that I could finally take control of my own destiny. It was terrifying because it meant stepping into the unknown, a place where I had to trust myself, where I had to believe that I was enough on my own. The first few months of living this new life were a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I spent more time focusing on the things that made me happy. I took up new hobbies, like learning how to cook new recipes from different cultures, experimenting with flavors I'd never tried before. I began to travel more, not to escape anything, but to explore the world on my terms. I went on solo hikes through the mountains, stayed in small villages where no one knew me, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of being anyone's daughter or sister. I was just Emily. I was just me, and that was enough. It wasn't just about doing things on my own. It was about rediscovering parts of myself I had buried for years. I began to paint again, something I had loved when I was younger but had put aside for the sake of everyone else's needs. I hadn't realized how much I missed it until I picked up a brush and let the colors flow. I painted my feelings, my hopes, my dreams, and it was liberating to express myself without holding back, without worrying about what anyone else thought. It wasn't about creating a masterpiece. It was about creating for myself, about allowing myself the freedom to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to learn and grow without judgment. As the seasons changed, so did I. The person who had once been so afraid of disappointing others was now standing tall, confident in the choices she made. I no longer felt the need to explain myself or seek permission. I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be, the woman who was unapologetically herself, the woman who didn't need to hide behind anyone else's expectations. And yet, the silence between me and my family continued. It wasn't the same silence that had plagued me before, filled with resentment and unspoken anger. No, this silence was different. It was a peaceful kind of silence, one that came from a place of understanding. My family had accepted that I had changed, that I was no longer the person they could manipulate or guilt into doing things for them. They didn't fully understand it, not yet, but they respected it. They had to. They could no longer take me for granted, and that was something they had to come to terms with. One afternoon, months after our conversation, I received a text from my mom. It was simple, but it felt like a breakthrough. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm proud of you, Emily. I'm sorry for the way things have been, and I want to do better. I miss you." I read the message several times, feeling a mix of emotions. I wasn't sure what to say, or if I was ready to jump back into the old dynamic. But I knew that this was a step in the right direction. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was progress. And sometimes progress is all we can ask for. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the years of being unseen, of being treated like I wasn't enough. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who no longer apologized for wanting to be happy, who no longer accepted being second place in her own life. I thought about all the moments of joy I had discovered on my own. Sipping coffee at a cafe I had never been to, reading books that made me feel alive, traveling to places I had only dreamed of. These were the things that mattered now. These were the things that filled me up in ways I had never known. And I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. Myself. It wasn't just about the trips I had taken or the hobbies I had picked up. It wasn't even about the conversations I had with my family or the boundaries I had set. It was about finally embracing who I was without guilt, without apology. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the person everyone else wanted me to be. But now, I was learning to embrace the woman I had always been deep down. A woman who was worthy of love, respect, and happiness, just as she was. When I went to bed at night, I didn't feel the familiar weight of regret or fear that had once haunted me. I felt at peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that feeling of being at home in my own skin was something I had never fully appreciated until now. As the months turned into a year, I began to see my life through a new lens. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't chasing anything, really. I was simply living. And in living, I was finding joy, finding meaning, finding purpose in every little thing. I spent time with friends who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I traveled more, not just to explore the world, but to explore myself, to continue to grow and evolve. I started volunteering for causes that mattered to me, not because I had to, but because it made me feel like I was contributing to the world in my own way. The sense of self I had cultivated was like a warm, steady flame inside me. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't demand attention, but it was strong and it was enough. I didn't need to be anyone else. I didn't need to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, or the perfect friend. I just needed to be Emily, and that was more than enough. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where my journey would take me next. But for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I was okay with not having all the answers, with not knowing what came next. What mattered now was that I was free. Free to be myself. Free to live on my own terms. Free to embrace whatever came my way without fear or hesitation. This was my life now, and I was finally living it exactly the way I wanted to. And that, in itself, was more than enough. Time continued to pass, and Emily began to realize that while she had achieved personal freedom, she hadn't fully escaped the shadows of her past. She had found herself, but the relationships within her family still carried traces that weren't so easy to erase. Occasional calls from her mom, irregular texts from Lily, these were conversations that Emily wasn't sure how to handle anymore. They were reminders of a life she had moved on from, yet still carried a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. But even in this newfound independence, Emily couldn't help but feel a certain pull towards the family she had once been so devoted to. It wasn't a longing to return to the old dynamic, to fall back into the role of the fixer. No, it was more of a quiet yearning, a wish for something different, something better. A relationship with her family that was built on mutual respect and understanding, not obligation and sacrifice. One evening, as she was organizing a stack of old letters and photographs, Emily came across a picture of her and Lily when they were kids. They were both laughing, their faces bright with joy, no tension between them. For a moment, Emily felt the sting of longing. She missed the simplicity of their relationship before everything had gotten complicated. She missed the girl she used to be, the one who had been full of hope, who hadn't yet learned the cost of always putting others first. As much as she wanted to move forward and leave it all behind, Emily realized that healing meant confronting the past. She couldn't just sever ties completely, nor could she ignore the role family still played in her life. But this time, she wasn't going to fall into old patterns. This time, she would set the terms for the relationship she wanted. A week later, Emily found herself standing outside her mom's house. The decision to visit had been difficult, but she knew it was time. She had been holding on to her space, her independence, for so long that she almost forgot what it felt like to just sit and talk with her family. When she rang the doorbell, her heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't fear, but the nervous anticipation of what might come from this. Her mom opened the door, and for a brief moment, they just stood there. No words, no apologies, just the two of them standing in the doorway. Finally, her mom spoke, her voice softer than Emily remembered. "I didn't expect you to come back," she said, her eyes searching Emily's face. "But I'm glad you did." Emily smiled, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to fix things, Mom. I'm here because I want us to move forward. We've both changed, and I think it's time we learned how to be a family again, but this time on new terms. Terms that respect who I am now, who we all are now." Her mom nodded, her lips trembling slightly, as though she had been holding back words she wasn't sure how to say. "I know I've failed you in the past, Emily. I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm willing to try if you are." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult and rewarding ones Emily had ever had. It wasn't easy. There were moments of silence, moments where both of them struggled to find the right words. But there was also a moment of understanding, of finally recognizing the person standing in front of them, not just as a daughter or a mother, but as two people trying to figure out how to rebuild something that had been broken. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself spending more time with her family, but it was different now. She wasn't trying to fix their problems, and they weren't expecting her to. Instead, they were starting to see her as she was now. Not the girl who always put them first, but the woman who had learned to put herself first. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension, but Emily no longer felt the burden of responsibility she had once carried. She had learned to set boundaries, to say no when she needed to, and to protect her peace. Emily continued to explore the world on her terms. She went on more solo trips, embracing the freedom that came with them. But she also started to build new connections, with friends who respected her boundaries and with a community that valued her for who she was, not what she could do for them. She was becoming the version of herself she had always longed to be, the woman who was no longer afraid of standing alone, but who also knew how to let people in on her own terms. Her relationship with Lily began to shift too. It wasn't an immediate transformation, but over time, they found a new dynamic. One where Emily wasn't the one who had to fix everything, and where Lily began to see her as an equal, not as someone to be used. There were still moments of tension, moments where old habits threatened to resurface, but both of them were learning how to communicate in a way that was healthier, more honest. One evening, as Emily sat by the window of her apartment, a cup of tea in hand, she reflected on how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had learned how to embrace her own life, her own desires, and her own worth. She had learned that family didn't have to be a burden, that love didn't have to come with strings attached. She had found peace in knowing that she didn't need anyone's approval to be happy, to be enough. And for the first time in her life, Emily was living exactly the way she wanted. She was free from guilt, free from the expectations of others, and free to be the person she had always been deep inside. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Emily was no longer afraid of it. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she could handle it, that she could trust herself. Because in embracing this new life, she had finally learned the most important lesson of all. She was enough, just as she was.